Do you remember your first glimpse of the ocean? Your first sandcastle? The first time a wave knocked you down? Or a sunburn? Ouch. Do you remember putting on your shoes to go ride the rides at the pavilion? Did you go to the beach every year the first week of summer? Or did you grow up in Myrtle Beach? Do you remember the dancing, the beach music? Spring break? You may have spent your honeymoon listening to the wind and waves, or may have even gotten married in Myrtle Beach. And watched your own family grow up all too quickly, doing many of the same things every year that you did a long time ago. The beach is a place we all belong to, whether we have lived here all our lives or have only come for a single weekend. You get sand in your shoes, you breathe the salt air, a wave goes by, and your life is changed forever. Even if you've been away for much longer than you'd like, and even if your old friend Myrtle Beach has changed so much you hardly recognize her, coming back to the beach is like coming home. Myrtle Beach began as a dream. Franklin G. Burris, a Civil War veteran and successful businessman, told his young daughter in the late 1890s, "I may not live to see it, and you may not, but someday this whole strand will be a resort."
The Burris family in Conway had a mercantile store, a general store, and their main business was lumber and tree farming. And they farmed the pine trees to get the rosin and the tar for maritime shipbuilding.
The Burris and Collins Company built a railroad spur to the coast to a place called simply Newtown.
And its primary purpose was to access the land quickly. The train would get from Conway to Myrtle Beach in, say, an hour. Otherwise, it took 2 days.
The Burris, as I understand, built the railroad down to the beach for the lumber and turpentine industry. That was their purpose in building it, not for tourists.
But some passengers on the Conway and Seashore Railway began to investigate other possibilities for the coast.
When the train began to run over here, they started marveling at the wonderful beaches and the ocean. And on the weekends, the local citizenry of Horry County would come into Conway on Sunday and ride that train into the seashore.
A trip on the train in those days was quite an adventure.
One of the hazards was that the sparks flew from the wood-burning train, catching the hats and scarves and clothing on fire. So ever so often they had to stop and put out flames that were developing. And you just took a chance with that when you came to the beach.
Before long, the Burris Company opened the Seaside Inn, a 3-story wooden hotel with boardwalks connecting it to the train depot and the beach.
It cost just $2 a day to stay in the Seaside, but it had no plumbing or electricity. But that included the 3 meals every day. So I guess in a way that was a bargain.
Swimming in the ocean was an opportunity to show off the latest fashions.
The bathing suits were made of heavy mattress ticking. And when the ladies got into the water, the skirts would float up. And so they would look sort of like inverted umbrellas. As they waded, that's all they could do. They certainly couldn't swim. To take a shower, they had a tub full of water, and they would, or a bucket, and they would pour that on the person. So you'd get a nice, fresh, cold shower.
Eventually, the name Newtown was changed to Myrtle Beach.
One of the Burris ladies suggested Myrtle because of the myrtle bushes, and that caught on, and so they decided to name it Myrtle Beach.
Visitors to Myrtle Beach soon began looking for entertainment for when the long summer days were through.
The first little pavilion was a little 8-sided box-looking pavilion, and it was connected to the Seaside Hotel by a boardwalk. You know, the sand dunes were so deep, it was almost impossible to walk along there. And at night, everybody would go to listen to the music and dance. They had an old phonograph, and they could wind it up and play records. The parents would sit outside, probably to chaperone, and to see if the music was too fast or if the couples were dancing too close and that sort of thing. But about 10 o'clock, they would play Good Night Ladies, and that would be the signal to go home. Of course, the children never wanted to go home. They wanted to stay and have more fun at the little pavilion.
The first pavilion was replaced by a second, larger pavilion, and live orchestras would replace the Victrola. Beachfront property was priced to sell in those early days.
The lots on the boulevard you could get very, very cheap. In some instances, I have heard that they would give you a lot if you agreed to build a house that cost as much as $300, or they would sell you a lot for $300 and build a house that would cost $500. So somewhere in there, it's a real good bargain, but a lot of money back in those days.
Believing that property values had nowhere to go but up, a northern investor, Simeon Chapin, visited Myrtle Beach and was given the opportunity to purchase a huge tract of land.
Mr. Chapin went back to New York and talked to his partners and those in Chicago and tried to get one partner that would come down, if he were to buy it, and live here and look after it. He could get no partner in either Chicago or New York whose wife was willing to come down to this wilderness. In this tract of land was 9 miles of beachfront, and when Mr. Chapin had it appraised, the verdict was excellent turpentine, tobacco, pulp, but 9 miles of beachfront worthless.
Intending to turn down the offer, Mr. Chapin took the train from Chicago to Conway, but changed his mind at the last minute, creating Myrtle Beach Farms Company in partnership with the Burris family.
Mr. Chapin was a very dignified, personable gentleman whom I knew only as waiting on him or seeing him in the store. But I was working at the service station, and they would come and I would service the car, and he was always very kind and very gentlemanly and appreciative. And he seemed to be that way with everyone that he talked with.
Never worked for a better company in my life than the Chapin Company was. Worked at the lumberyard, and they're really nice people.
If we don't have it, we'll have it for you tomorrow, was the theme of Chapin's department store.
It was the perfect country store. Mr. Chapin just felt he wanted a nice department store, every type the women's dresses, men's suits, and china, real lovely china that nobody sells at all today.
As they added a department, they would add another part to the building. The post office was located in the building. Eventually, a drugstore, a beauty salon. Ladies could come and spend the day, buy clothing, have their hair done, have lunch, and just have an enjoyable day together.
Chapin Company, if you worked there, you got to see everybody in town every few days. Not literally every day, but in 1 week, you'd probably see almost everybody that you knew would come through Chapin Company. It was really the heart of the town.
So the new town, Myrtle Beach, was established, and seeds were planted for the growth that was sure to come.
The real beginning of Myrtle Beach was when the Ocean Forest Hotel opened. I think that was the beginning of Myrtle Beach as a destination.
In the late 1920s, the Woodside brothers, textile magnates from Greenville, decided with Holmesby Springs, a real estate agent and banker from Georgetown, to invest in Myrtle Beach.
In the middle 20s, my father was working with Woodside Brothers in Greenville, South Carolina. And being familiar with the coastal area, he was aware of the Myrtle Beach tract of 66,000 acres being for sale. Basically, it was from First Avenue South to what is now Brockwell.
They decided to pool their knowledge and resources to develop this area up here into a sort of resort for the very rich. And so they created something in Myrtle Beach that's very different from much of the rest of the beach.
At the north end of town, a championship golf course and clubhouse were built, along with tennis courts and riding stables. The natural freshwater lakes and beautiful woodlands were already a sportsman's paradise. Kings Highway was paved, and several new streets were laid out. The centerpiece of the enterprise was a 10-story, million-dollar hotel that looked like a castle.
Well, it was a marvel to the few people who lived in Myrtle Beach or in the county. Some people had never seen a building with an elevator.
It was the first indoor pool I think I had seen. And they had a beautiful patio outside where they would have name bands to come and play.
This was just phase one of the Woodside package. Plans were on the table for Arcady, which would be an even more upscale, exclusive hotel and resort 5 miles north of the Ocean Forest. Arcady would be a playground for the ultra-rich, where they could perfect the arts of rest and recreation. Arcady never happened. In 1929, the stock market crashed and economic depression set in. The Ocean Forest Country Club opened in 1928. The course designer was Robert White, a Scotsman who became the first president of the American PGA. In the 50s, the golf club, which became known as Pine Lakes, was the location for the founding of Sports Illustrated magazine. Pine Lakes International Country Club now is known as the granddaddy of all Grand Strand golf courses. The Ocean Forest Hotel, opening in 1930, became a community landmark and received its share of visitors, but never fully realized its potential. Today, the Ocean Forest Hotel is only a postcard and a beautiful memory. World War II ended the Depression. Sacrifices were now being made for the troops overseas.
You could only, I think, have 1 or 2 pairs of shoes a year. Of course, we couldn't afford any more than that. and you were rationed sugar and coffee. And I can remember we saved our